but you have to, okay?
Watch out for those people. First question.
Not getting near the speaker.
Hi, I live up in North Chatham County, and there are several communities that get their water service through a tower or tank that has a capacity that was defined a long time ago, and those communities have continued to grow, and there's still growth going on around those communities. How are you adjusting that capacity in the tanks to maintain the water flow that, even though it is restricted at Tuesdays and Fridays for watering, that's your outside garden landscape stuff. How are you managing that expected and ongoing growth?
We're in the process of building a hydraulic model that connects all of these things together. Okay, and we're pretty close to having finished growth projections for the year 2050 and 2070. We have I'll say a water balance plan that accounts for 42 million gallons a day of water and wastewater and how to move it around Lee and Chatham counties. That includes some of the things you're talking about and context. Again, the cost of that plan estimated, I don't know, 6 months ago was over $2 billion. So it's a matter of prioritization, and how can we get there, because the system can't handle all that at one time. I'll just tell you this, you're not alone. We've got the same issue in other places with, as growth comes, you need more elevated storage to support your pressures and this, that, and the other. You need bigger pipes. You need, where you thought you only needed a pipe that was, 12 inches big, now you've reached the end of its service life. Worked great for the 30 years it was in the ground. It's still doing a good job. But now you need to plan for the next 30 years, and how big does the next pipe need to be? It'll probably end up with some pressure problems that we wish addressed earlier. It'll probably end up with some slowdown of growth in particular areas until we can catch up. But I think what we'll have at least is a plan, an idea of how to get there. And we're not just reacting to somebody who's coming in with something. We've thought about it, and we have something we can move towards.
Thank you.
I also live in North Chatham. I live in a neighborhood that I think has some kind of water treatment in there and going through like Old North State. But how do you work with the various new developments, things like that? Where's all the interconnectedness between the new developments, things like Old North State, et cetera, where y'all begin and end, et cetera?
There's just a development process. Depends where it is. Whether it's in Chatham County, whether it's in Pittsburgh, whether it's in Solid City, or whether it's in Sanford. They're all slightly different, but they're essentially the same. A developer approaches you, meaning us, hopefully early, to say, hey, look, I'm looking at putting this here, and this is what we think we need. And then we can talk about, can the system handle it, or what are the improvements that are going to be needed? And there's a technical review committee process that kind of formalizes it, but we get in there earlier most of the time because it's critical. I mean, if you want a water and wastewater solution, you need to talk to us as soon as you are thinking about something, because it's not always easy, and it's something you might need to work into your financial plan or whatever you need to do. So they come to us, and hopefully earlier rather than later. And we had a little bump in the road at the beginning about, we used to do a Pittsburgh, now we're dealing with TriRiver, what the heck is it, who are you, whatever. And that's an interesting story too. I mean, we changed the name to TriRiver, but really it's just this water department of the city of Sanford. But the partnership felt like it was bigger than just the city of Sanford, and the council, they recognized that, you want to be a partner, you don't want to be somebody who comes in and you're not taking over, right? So they changed the name, so that we got TriRiver trucks riding around instead of City Sanford trucks. So I think that was a wise move on their part. But anyway, people come to us, we look at where they're talking about, what they're talking about, and try to plan the improvements so that the existing people don't have any negative impacts that we can avoid.
What makes water treatment so expensive?
you know, I would offer this to anybody in this room. If you want to come and look at what we have to do at the water plant to take water from the river and make it to a product that you can drink safely. It will take you to the wastewater plant and show you what it takes to take, you know, that waste and turn it into one of two things. Either a solid that can be used on farmers' fields for fertilizer, or water clean enough to go back into the ecosystem. It's pretty important stuff. And I think the scale and the scope will help answer your question. I think the more technical part of it takes a lot of electricity to move a million gallons of water around. That's just a fact. It takes a lot of tanks with a lot of equipment to be able to treat with polymers and chemicals and this, that, and the other. All those things have a cost. And you don't want to over-treating it is not good either, so you got to hit this slot. So you got a lot of instrumentation and things, making sure you're in the right spot. So I've got people, I've got this technical apparatus that shows me where I'm supposed to be. I got people trained to do this stuff, and I've got the products it takes to make this thing happen. And then when I get done, I take a lot of stuff out of the water, and I got to do something with it. I got to take it somewhere else. So there's just a lot to it. I think that's the simple answer. And everything you touch costs money because it's pretty specific. It's a technical thing in a small slot, so it's niche, and you can't go to Walmart and buy what you need. You're dealing with some pretty specialized stuff.
So kudos to you guys for what you're doing, how you're doing it, and for your regional approach. So I'm a developer in the along 421 corridor, and there are numerous small towns wrestling with this issue today. Just had a pretty good practice in Liberty, North Carolina, where they went from $600 to hook up to their sewer system to $7,000. And if I understand correctly, to hook up to your system, it's now $15,000. How is this possible? So on my end of it, what I hear 8 hours a day is affordable housing. Well, good grief, that's 10% of an affordable house. 150 grand, well now it's 15,000 just to put water and sewer to it. So I've grown up in North Carolina, grew up in Greensboro. It wasn't this way all the time. Something has happened in the last 10 years. And I don't understand what the sustainability trend is. I know you guys got to get paid for what you do, but we've got to have houses that people can afford to buy. So this is where it hits. So what's the solution?
I'm not smart enough to know what the solution is, but I can explain the connection piece. You know, what you're talking about is what's called a system development fee, and it's prescribed through the legislature on how you can calculate your system development fee. And what it is the opportunity for the utility to collect money from growth that growth is putting the pressure on the utility. So what does that mean? You either connect to a water line that's out front, that you don't have to do anything but connect to it, which means somebody's been paying a water bill to maintain that capacity in that water line, all the way from wherever they get their water in front of your house for years. And you're paying a portion of that back to those people, because otherwise you would have to get a water line all the way from the river to in front of your house. And the other aspect of it is you're putting pressure on the system to go into the future. So there's a whole prescribed thing through the legislature on how you go through the math to calculate these fees. They're a lot. You're exactly right. It's an additional pressure on the cost of a house. But I'll tell you that Pittsboro had a capital improvement plan, which is the cost of putting in pipes and pumps and treatment and this and that and the other, there was over $500 million over the next 25 years to deal with growth. Somebody's got to pay. And affordability is an interesting question because there's a cost of getting into the house, but then there's also the cost of staying in the house. So a $15,000 fee up front versus a water and a wastewater bill that's a couple $100 a month, because the money's got to come from somewhere, because we have to pay Duke Energy, we have to pay the chemical companies, we got to pay all the people we have to pay as well. But you're absolutely right. It is a cost that affects the cost of a house. There's no doubt about it, because you got to pass it along. I mean, it's the only way to do it.
Yeah, I want to pick up a little bit on that. You know, it's 90% of the wastewater infrastructure was funded by the federal government 20, 30 years ago. They do, hey John, they do maybe 5 to 10% now. And so that's been really the big gap that's been created that's putting this burden on. We've been lucky here that the General Assembly has been generous, mainly because they want to focus on this regionalization, because you can tell it takes more sophistication in finance and operations. And I would say the other thing is we're cleaning everything to a higher standard. Most people don't know that the Pittsburgh plant was in violation for the last 20 years because they had not invested in it. And so there were a lot of things that are being fixed by this merger. But my main point is, I'd like to thank Vic. We're very fortunate in this area. You know, we talk about residential growth, but the economic development stuff would not have happened without Vic and his team's vision. It's more complicated than just capacity and getting it there. Vic has always been clever. That pipe he's talking about was originally a 18-inch, now it's 30 or something like that. And so he said, hey, we can figure out the money to go ahead and put in the future, even though we don't have it permitted, and disturb the earth one time, put this capacity in. So he's really future-proofed it. You know, think about that. That is 10 times the capacity that Pittsburgh alone had for decades at 7 to 8 gallons a year. So hopefully we'll get some more grants from the state, and that'll maybe help some pressure on the system development fees, which I can tell you, I feel your pain. It is a very difficult thing. I agree with you. I sat here last month and said we've got all these policies that are put in place individually, but nobody's gone through and said, how do we go and get things affordable again? Because it's really hard to hit affordable housing and all this stuff. So what would that take investment-wise to pass that along? I saw the day that Duke Energy sold a bunch of credits, and supposedly we're going to get a reduction in our rates. You know, grants from the state or federal government would be about the only way we can do. So some of that capital burden that he's talking about, but could get reduced and not burden the individual consumer now or in the future. But long story short, we're lucky to have someone Vic that's grown with this system and put us in a place where we can have a high functioning system that can accommodate everybody's needs. And just like thinking about it, you know, you've got to have a line that worked really good for a long time and you weren't having to make investment, but it doesn't mean you weren't running out of its useful life. And that kind of forward planning was not happening in each of these municipalities, I can tell you. So there were big problems coming, and thankfully Vic and his team were here to solve it. Thanks.
We got time for one more question before we have to do the Gene power 5 minutes.
All right, this question is coming from my 6-year-old self, so I've been hanging on to it for 38 years now. Can you explain how water towers work?
Yeah, as much as engineers, as much as engineers want to try to baffle you with their brilliance, it's pretty simple. It's all about energy. It's all about stored energy. We take water from the water plant, and we power a pump, which puts energy into the water and puts it up into a water tank. That's what determines how much pressure you got at your house. How high that is compared to where you are, there's a way to figure out what your pressure is going to be at the house. So all that really does is help equalize pressure across the system. We're always pumping water into them, and there's always water coming out so that you have adequate pressure, hopefully, in your system.
Lee, is the real question, your 6-year-old brain is your real question, if the water tower fell, would water just completely go all over the place? All right, Jenna, oddly, you had your hand
I
raised.
did. Is there a way, like, I guess this might be a question for you too, Kirk, but thank you. Oh, yeah.
Is there a way for us to get in touch with, or like the community to impact the decision from the federal government to lower those prices? Because, me and my fiance, we both work full time. She's a computer scientist, and we can't afford a house here, and we won't be able to. So while I understand, there's not much we can do, and that is a federal problem, do you think community impact can help that case? Because I want to stay here. I love Pittsburgh. But eventually, yeah, I do want a house. And, maybe that's where Lee and Sanford come into place. And, maybe the younger generations move out there if we can afford it. But I don't know. I feel like we could do more to try and, as a community, fix that. I don't know.
I mean, Kirk's right. A lot of the infrastructure that we've lived off for 50 years was paid for by the federal government in the 70s. And that's gone away. Certainly, we're talking to your elected officials about the fact that, hey, this costs a lot of money. And it costs a lot of money everywhere. It's not just unique to Lee and Chatham County. And is there a way to help support that through some sort of federal program which would redistribute money? It can't hurt, I can tell you that. But, how much of an impact it makes, I mean, there's a lot of competing interests there, so I'm not exactly sure how much it helps, but I don't think it could hurt in any way, shape, or form. Even your local meaning state level at that point. But Kirk's exactly right. We've been very lucky to get a lot of grants and low interest loans, and all of it really helps to keep some of the prices down. So, yeah.
I just wanted to say real quick before we move to the Gene portion, and thank you for your time. The elephant in the room here is, it sounds like there's a shift in what Chatham was and what Chatham is having to contend with what it's going to be. And I think the fundamental thing that we have to address is, in considering how to pay for this stuff, it does come down to a commercial tax base expansion. And we have to be comfortable with that conversation. I think that we have to, the big subject right now, I'm sure that it's in your news feed, are things like data centers. And we don't have to get into the weeds of yes or no on data centers, but we do have to get into the weeds of, we have, growth is inevitable, we can't change that. It's a demographic curve, it's a shuffling of the deck after COVID, people coming to North Carolina. The cat's out the bag, y'all. I've tried to keep it a secret as long as possible. North Carolina's an awesome place to live. And I just want to thank you so much for being here, because these are the kind of conversations that you can go out to the community and have see these conversations around collective consciousness around these things that we can't really shut our eyes off to. Please put your hands together for so our next portion.